The screams pierced through the quiet Saturday night like shattered glass, jolting the entire Maple Street neighborhood from their peaceful slumber. It was 2:17 a.m. when Maria Rodriguez's blood-curdling shriek echoed from the two-story colonial house at the end of the cul-de-sac, followed immediately by the desperate cries of 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez. "No! Stop! Please stop!" Emma's terrified voice carried through the thin walls, reaching the ears of neighbor Janet Phillips, who immediately grabbed her phone and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. Inside the Rodriguez home, a nightmare was unfolding that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. Emma had been fast asleep in her pink princess pajamas, surrounded by her collection of stuffed animals, when Marcus Wheeler, the 34-year-old man she had trusted and called Uncle Marcus for the past 3 years, crept into her bedroom. Wheeler had been the Rodriguez family's trusted friend and babysitter since Emma was 5 years old. A soft-spoken man who worked at the local community center, he had always been gentle with children, often volunteering for weekend events and helping parents in the neighborhood. Maria and Carlos Rodriguez had never questioned leaving Emma in his care while they celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary at La Fontana, their favorite Italian restaurant downtown. The evening had started normally. Wheeler arrived at 6 p.m. with Emma's favorite movie, Mona, and a bag of her preferred snacks. Emma had hugged him enthusiastically, chattering about her upcoming school play where she would portray a sunflower. Carlos had reminded Wheeler about Emma's bedtime routine, stories, prayers, and her nightlight that projected dancing butterflies on the ceiling. "We'll be back by midnight," Maria had said, kissing Emma's forehead. "Be good for Uncle Marcus." "Me more." But around 1:30 a.m., Wheeler's demeanor changed dramatically. The trusted family friend became a predator, entering Emma's room with intentions that would shatter her innocent world. What happened next would be seared into Emma's memory forever, a violation so profound that it would require years of therapy and the help of a very special golden retriever to overcome. Emma's screams reached a crescendo when she managed to break free from Wheeler's grasp, running toward her parents' bedroom while calling for her mother. Wheeler, panicked by the noise and realizing his horrific actions, fled through the back door, leaving behind a traumatized child whose life had been irrevocably changed in a matter of minutes. Detective Sarah Mills was the first officer to arrive at the scene, her squad car's flashing lights painting the quiet suburban street in alternating red and blue. She had been working the night shift for 12 years and had seen too many cases like this, but nothing had prepared her for what she found inside the Rodriguez home. Emma was discovered huddled in her parents' walk-in closet, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, Peanut, against her chest. Her pink pajamas were torn, her face streaked with tears, and her small body shook uncontrollably. Her dark brown eyes, usually bright and full of life, now held a hollow, distant look that Detective Mills recognized all too well. "Hey there, sweetheart," Mills said softly, crouching down to Emma's eye level. "My name is Sarah. I'm here to help you. You're safe now." But Emma couldn't respond. The trauma had stolen her voice, leaving her trapped in a world of terror where words seemed impossible to form. She simply stared ahead, occasionally whimpering when anyone tried to approach too closely. Maria and Carlos burst through the front door 20 minutes later, having received the call from Detective Mills while they were still at the restaurant. Maria's anniversary dress was stained with tears as she rushed to her daughter, her heart breaking at the sight of Emma's condition. "Mi niña, mi pequeña niña," Maria whispered, carefully wrapping her arms around Emma. "Mama está aquí. You're safe now, baby. Mama is here." Carlos stood frozen in the doorway, his face a mixture of rage and devastation. His hands clenched into fists as the reality of what had happened to his precious daughter sank in. "Where is he?" he demanded. through gritted teeth. "Where is that monster?" The medical examination at Seattle Children's Hospital confirmed every parent's worst nightmare. Dr. Jennifer Kim, a pediatric specialist trained in handling sexual assault cases, documented evidence that would later prove crucial in Wheeler's prosecution. The physical trauma was extensive, but the psychological damage ran even deeper. "Emma is going to need intensive therapy," Dr. Kim explained to the devastated parents in the hospital's family consultation room. "This kind of trauma affects children differently than adults. She may experience nightmares, regression in behavior, difficulty sleeping, and problems with trust and attachment." Over the following weeks, Emma's condition deteriorated rapidly. The vibrant little girl who had been excited about her school play and loved singing Disney songs became a shadow of herself. She stopped eating her favorite foods, refused to sleep in her own room, and hadn't spoken a single word since that terrible night. Even simple activities like taking a bath became triggers that sent her into panic attacks. Sleep became Emma's greatest enemy. Every night brought the same recurring nightmares. Wheeler's face looming over her, the feeling of helplessness, and the terror that he might return. She would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, calling for her parents in a voice hoarse from crying. Maria quit her job as a nurse to stay home with Emma full-time, while Carlos struggled to balance his work as an electrician with the mounting legal and medical expenses. The family's savings dwindled as they sought help from various specialists, therapists, and trauma counselors. 6 weeks after the assault, Emma remained locked in her silent world of fear, jumping at shadows and flinching whenever any adult male came near her. It was Dr. Lisa Hoffman, a child psychologist specializing in trauma recovery, who first suggested an unconventional solution that would change Emma's life forever. "I think Emma might benefit from a psychiatric service dog," Dr. Hoffman explained. During one of their sessions, "There's a program in California that trains dogs specifically to help children with severe PTSD." Little did they know that this suggestion would lead them to Bailey, a golden retriever who would not only help Emma heal, but would also make legal history in a Seattle courtroom, changing the landscape of victims' rights across the entire United States. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sprawling campus of Canine Companions for Independence in Santa Rosa, California, as the Rodriguez family drove through the gates that would forever change their lives. It had been 3 months since that horrific night, and Emma still hadn't spoken more than a few whispered words. The 400-mile journey from Seattle had been filled with cautious hope and desperate prayers. Dr. Lisa Hoffman had spent weeks convincing Maria and Carlos that this unconventional therapy might be their daughter's salvation. "Traditional therapy isn't reaching Emma," she had explained during their last session in Seattle. "The trauma has created walls that even the most skilled therapists can't penetrate. But sometimes, an animal can reach places we humans simply can't touch." Robert Kim, the facility's lead trainer and a former Marine who understood trauma firsthand, greeted the family at the main building. At 45, Kim had dedicated the last 15 years of his life to training psychiatric service dogs after his own struggles with PTSD following 3 tours in Afghanistan. His weathered face carried the wisdom of someone who had walked through darkness and found his way back to light. "Welcome to CCI," Kim said warmly, his voice carrying a gentle authority that immediately put Emma at ease. "I know this journey has been difficult, but I want you to know that you're in the right place. We've been preparing for Emma's arrival for weeks." The facility was impressive, spanning over 50 acres with specialized training areas, veterinary facilities, and housing for over 100 dogs in various stages of training. Emma clutched her mother's hand as they walked past outdoor training courses, where dogs practiced everything from opening doors to detecting medical emergencies. "Each of our psychiatric service dogs undergoes 2 years of intensive training," Kim explained as they toured the facilities. But Bailey is special. He's what we call a natural. A dog born with an almost supernatural ability to sense human emotions and respond accordingly. Bailey was waiting in training room C, a comfortable space designed to feel like a living room rather than a clinical environment. When the door opened, Emma's steps faltered. There, lying calmly on a soft blue mat, was the most beautiful golden retriever she had ever seen. His coat gleamed like spun gold in the afternoon light, and his intelligent brown eyes seemed to hold depths of understanding that defied explanation. At 2 years old, Bailey weighed 75 pounds of pure gentleness. His breeding line had been carefully selected over generations for temperament, intelligence, and emotional sensitivity. His mother, Honey, had been a legendary therapy dog at the facility, and his father, Duke, had served as a psychiatric service dog for a veteran with severe PTSD. "Hello, Bailey," Kim said softly. At the sound of his name, Bailey's tail wagged once, but he remained in place, his eyes fixed on Emma with an intensity that seemed almost human. Emma stood frozen in the doorway, her small body trembling with the anxiety that had become her constant companion. For weeks, she had been afraid of everything: shadows, sudden noises, and especially strangers. But something about Bailey was different. He didn't move toward her or make any demands. He simply existed in that space, radiating a calm presence. Bet seemed to wrap around Emma like a warm blanket. "He knows," Kim whispered to Maria and Carlos. "Watch this." Without any verbal command or hand signal, Bailey slowly rose from his mat and took 3 careful steps toward Emma, then lowered himself into a perfect downstay position about 4 feet away. His message was clear: "I'm here if you need me, but I won't invade your space." For the first time in 3 months, Emma's rigid posture began to soften. Her death grip on her mother's hand loosened slightly, and she took a tentative step forward. Bailey's tail gave another gentle wag, but he remained perfectly still, allowing Emma to control their interaction completely. "Bailey has been training specifically for cases like Emma's," Kim explained quietly to the parents. "He's learned to detect the chemical changes that occur during panic attacks, changes in breathing, heart rate, and even scent. But more importantly, he's learned patience. Many trauma victims need to feel in control of their environment, and Bailey understands that." The breakthrough came 20 minutes into their first session. Emma had gradually moved closer to Bailey, drawn by his peaceful presence. When she finally sat cross-legged on the floor about 2 feet away from him, Bailey did something remarkable. Without moving his body, he stretched his neck forward and gently placed his massive head on Emma's lap. The effect was instantaneous. Emma's chronically tense shoulders dropped, her rapid breathing slowed, and for the first time since the assault, her face relaxed into something approaching peace. Her small hands, which had been clenched into fists for months, slowly opened and found their way to Bailey's silky ears. "Good boy," Emma whispered, the first coherent words she had spoken in 12 weeks. Maria burst into tears, covering her mouth to muffle her sobs of relief. Carlos wrapped his arms around his wife, his own eyes glistening as he watched his daughter experience her first moment of genuine comfort since the trauma. Over the next 2 weeks, Emma and Bailey's bond deepened in ways that amazed even the experienced trainers. Bailey seemed to anticipate Emma's needs before she even recognized them herself. When her anxiety spiked during a thunderstorm, Bailey positioned himself between Emma and the window, creating a physical barrier against her fear. When nightmares jolted her awake during their overnight stays at the facility, Bailey was instantly at her bedside, his warm presence chasing away the shadows. Kim worked tirelessly to customize Bailey's training to Emma's specific needs. The dog learned to recognize Emma's pre-panic breathing pattern and would immediately perform deep pressure therapy, placing his full weight across her lap or chest. He mastered the art of creating space in crowded areas, positioning himself to give Emma a clear exit route. Most remarkably, he learned to detect when Emma was beginning to dissociate, a trauma response where she mentally left her body, and would gently nose her hand or rest his head against her leg to anchor her to the present moment. Bailey isn't just a dog, Kim explained to the family during their final training session. He's Emma's bridge back to the world. He'll go wherever she goes, sleep wherever she sleeps, and be her constant reminder that she's safe. The $30,000 cost of Bailey's training and Emma's intensive therapy program had drained the Rodriguez family's savings. But as they prepared to return to Seattle, they knew it was the best investment they had ever made. Emma was sleeping through the night, eating regular meals, and most importantly, she was speaking again. But none of them could have predicted that Bailey's greatest test wouldn't come in the comfort of their home or the safety of a therapist's office. It would come in a Seattle courtroom, where a little girl's courage and her golden guardian would make legal history that would echo across the entire United States. The mahogany-paneled conference room on the 7th floor of the King County Prosecutor's Office buzzed with tension as two of Seattle's most formidable legal minds prepared for battle. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the October rain pelted against the glass, creating rivers that seemed to mirror the storm brewing inside. Defense attorney Michael Brennan slammed his leather briefcase shut with such force that his coffee cup jumped, sending droplets of dark roast across the polished table. At 52, Brennan was known throughout Washington state as the Barracuda, a ruthless defender who had never lost a case involving crimes against children. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his $3,000 Armani suit impeccable, and his reputation for destroying witnesses on cross-examination was legendary. "A dog in my courtroom?" Brennan's voice rose to a near shout, his Irish accent becoming more pronounced as his anger intensified. "Lisa, this is absolutely ridiculous. What's next? Emotional support peacocks? Therapy llamas? Where does this insanity end?" Across the conference table, Prosecutor Lisa Chun remained outwardly calm, though her knuckles were white as she gripped her Mont Blanc pen. At 38, Chun had built her career on prosecuting the most heinous crimes against children, earning the nickname the Guardian Angel from victims' families. Her black hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her dark eyes held the steely determination of someone who had seen too much evil in the world. "Michael, this isn't about emotional support," Chun replied, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Bailey isn't a pet or a comfort animal. He's a fully trained psychiatric service dog, and Emma has a documented disability that requires his assistance. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, she has every right to reasonable accommodation." The case had already become a media sensation throughout the Pacific Northwest. Marcus Wheeler's arrest had sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Maple Street, where he had been trusted by dozens of families over the years. As news of his alleged crime spread, 3 more families came forward with similar accusations, painting a picture of a predator who had hidden behind a mask of kindness for years. But it was Emma's story that captured the public's heart. Local news stations had covered her recovery with Bailey, showing carefully edited footage of the little girl who had found her voice again with the help of her golden guardian. The Seattle Times ran a front-page story titled "Hope on 4 Paws," chronicling Emma's journey from traumatized victim to courageous survivor. Judge Patricia Williams, presiding over King County Superior Court for the past 15 years, had never faced such a complex legal question. At 58, she was known for her no-nonsense approach and encyclopedic knowledge of precedent law. Her chambers were lined with leather-bound legal volumes, many of which she had already consulted in preparation for this unprecedented case. "Your Honor," Brennan continued, pacing in front of the judge's bench like a caged tiger. Allowing this animal into the courtroom would create an unfair, prejudicial impact on the jury. The sight of an innocent child with a beautiful dog will automatically generate sympathy for the prosecution's case. My client has the constitutional right to a fair trial, and that right supersedes any accommodation request. Chun stood to respond, her 5'4" frame radiating authority despite her small stature. Your Honor, Emma Rodriguez is not just any witness. She is the primary victim in this case. Without her testimony, Marcus Wheeler walks free to harm other children. But Emma cannot testify without Bailey's support. She has severe PTSD, documented panic disorder, and dissociative episodes that render her unable to function in stressful situations. The legal research had been exhaustive. Chan's team had worked around the clock for weeks, discovering a patchwork of conflicting rulings across the country. In 2017, a brave judge in Houston had allowed a service dog during a child's testimony in a domestic violence case, but the decision was overturned on appeal. In Florida, a similar request had been denied outright, resulting in a mistrial when the child victim suffered a complete breakdown on the witness stand. Dr. Amanda Foster, Emma's psychiatrist, had submitted a comprehensive report documenting Bailey's critical role in Emma's recovery. Separation from Bailey triggers immediate dissociation in Emma, Foster had written. Without his presence, she becomes functionally mute and experiences severe panic attacks that can last for hours. Bailey is not a luxury or comfort item. He is essential medical equipment. The case had attracted attention from legal experts nationwide. Professor Janet Morrison from Harvard Law School had filed an amicus brief arguing that the intersection of disability rights and criminal justice required courts to balance victim protection with defendants' rights. We cannot allow the legal system to become a tool of re-victimization, Morrison had written in her influential brief. Meanwhile, victim advocacy groups rallied around Emma's cause. The National Center for Victims of Crime organized protests outside the courthouse, holding signs reading, "Justice for Emma," and "Dogs Save Lives." Social media campaigns with hashtags like #EMMA's rights and #Bailey in court generated millions of impressions, with celebrities and politicians weighing in on the debate. But the defense had its own powerful arguments. The Washington State Bar Association expressed concerns about setting precedent that could fundamentally alter courtroom procedures. Criminal defense attorneys worried that accommodating service animals could create a slippery slope toward other dramatic changes in trial proceedings. Your Honor, Brennan argued passionately, the courtroom is a sacred space where justice must be blind. Introducing elements that could influence juror emotions undermines the very foundation of our legal system. We sympathize with Emma's situation, but we cannot allow sympathy to override the law. The stakes couldn't be higher. Wheeler faced multiple counts of child sexual assault, with potential sentences totaling over 50 years in prison. But beyond this individual case, legal observers knew that Judge Williams' decision could reshape how courts across America handle disabled witnesses. Emma, now 9 years old, had been practicing her testimony with Prosecutor Chun and victim advocate Maria Santos. In the safe environment of Chun's office, with Bailey by her side, Emma could recount the events of that terrible night with clarity and courage. But everyone knew that a courtroom filled with strangers, including her attacker, would present an entirely different challenge. This isn't about legal precedent or constitutional theory, Chun argued in her closing statement. The judge. This is about a little girl who deserves the chance to seek justice without being traumatized all over again. Bailey doesn't speak for Emma. He simply gives her the strength to speak for herself. As Judge Williams retreated to her chambers to consider the weighty decision, both legal teams knew they were participating in a case that would be studied in law schools for generations to come. The question wasn't just whether Emma could have Bailey in the courtroom. It was whether the American justice system was ready to evolve to protect its most vulnerable witnesses. Outside the courthouse, Bailey waited patiently in the family car with Emma, unaware that he was about to become the most famous service dog in legal history. The King County Courthouse had never seen anything like it. By 6 a.m. on the morning of November 15th, satellite trucks from CNN, NBC, ABC, and Fox News lined 3rd Avenue like a mechanized army, their towering antennae piercing the gray Seattle sky. News crews from as far away as London and Tokyo had descended upon the Pacific Northwest, turning Emma Rodriguez's fight for justice into an international spectacle. Anderson Cooper stood on the courthouse steps, his silver hair whipping in the autumn wind as he delivered his live report. "Good evening. I'm Anderson Cooper in Seattle, where a 9-year-old girl's request to have her service dog in court has ignited a national debate about disability rights, victim protection, and the very nature of justice in America." Inside her Harvard Law School office 3,000 miles away, Professor Janet Morrison worked feverishly through the night, surrounded by towers of legal precedent books and empty coffee cups. Morrison, a leading expert in disability law and criminal justice, had been following Emma's case since the first news reports emerged. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing for 3 days as reporters, legal scholars, and advocacy groups sought her expert opinion. "This case represents a watershed moment," Morrison explained during a live interview with CNN's legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin. "For decades, we've struggled to balance the rights of defendants with the needs of vulnerable witnesses. Emma's case forces us to confront whether our justice system is truly accessible to all Americans." Morrison's research had uncovered a complex web of contradictory rulings across the United States, each revealing the deep uncertainty surrounding service animals in courtrooms. In Harris County, Texas, Judge Maria Santos had made headlines in 2017 when she allowed a 7-year-old rape victim to testify alongside her psychiatric service dog, Max. The decision seemed groundbreaking until the Texas Court of Appeals overturned the ruling 6 months later, citing prejudicial impact on the jury. The appellate court's decision had devastating consequences. During the retrial, without Max present, the young victim suffered a complete psychological breakdown on the witness stand, becoming catatonic for over an hour before being rushed to the hospital. The case ended in a mistrial, and the defendant ultimately accepted a plea bargain for a fraction of the original charges. That child was re-victimized by the very system designed to protect her, Morrison noted in her comprehensive legal brief. "We cannot allow Emma Rodriguez to suffer the same fate." But Texas wasn't the only state grappling with this issue. In Broward County, Florida, Circuit Judge Robert Mitchell had taken the opposite approach just months after the Texas decision. When prosecutors requested that a service dog accompany a 10-year-old abuse victim during testimony, Mitchell denied the motion without hesitation. "The courtroom is not a therapy session," Judge Mitchell had declared from the bench. "While we sympathize with the victim's condition, we cannot allow emotional manipulation to influence judicial proceedings." The Florida victim, like her Texas counterpart, was unable to complete her testimony, resulting in another prosecutorial defeat and a predator walking free. The most encouraging precedent came from Jefferson County, Colorado, where Judge Sarah Chun, no relation to prosecutor Lisa Chun, had crafted an innovative compromise. In 2018, she allowed a service dog to remain in the courtroom during a child's testimony, but required the animal to be positioned completely out of the jury's sightline. The Colorado case resulted in a successful conviction, but defense attorneys immediately appealed, arguing that even the child's knowledge of the dog's presence created unfair advantage. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, director of the National Center for Trauma-Informed Justice at Georgetown University, had been tracking these cases for her groundbreaking research on courthouse accommodations. Her findings painted a stark picture of a legal system failing its most vulnerable witnesses. We've documented over 200 cases nationwide where child witnesses with disabilities were unable to testify effectively due to lack of proper accommodations. Harper explained during a Simpus phone conference with legal reporters. The result is a two-tiered justice system where crimes against disabled victims go unpunished simply because the victims cannot navigate our antiquated court procedures. Harper's research team had spent months analyzing video testimony from similar cases, documenting the physiological changes that occurred when traumatized children were separated from their service animals. Heart rates spiked by an average of 40%. Cortisol levels increased by 300%. And in 67% of cases, children experienced dissociative episodes that rendered their testimony incomprehensible. Meanwhile, the disability rights community mobilized with unprecedented unity. Marca Bristow, former chair of the National Council on Disability, organized a coalition of over 50 advocacy organizations supporting Emma's case. The National Federation of the Blind, Paralyzed Veterans of America, and the Autism Society of America all filed supporting briefs, recognizing that Emma's case could establish crucial precedent for courthouse accessibility. This isn't just about one little girl and her dog, Bristow declared during a press conference on the courthouse steps. This is about whether Americans with disabilities have equal access to justice. If Emma is denied her service dog, every disabled witness in America becomes more vulnerable. The opposition wasn't silent either. The National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers filed a comprehensive brief arguing that service animals in courtrooms could fundamentally alter the adversarial nature of American jurisprudence. And ACDL President Jennifer Thompson raised concerns about a slippery slope toward other dramatic accommodations. Where does it end? Thompson asked during a heated debate on Meet the Press, if we allow service dogs, what about therapy horses? Emotional support monkeys? The courtroom must remain a neutral space, governed by evidence and law, not emotion and sympathy. Social media became a battlefield of competing hashtags. Hashtag Justice for Emma garnered over 2.3 million tweets, while hashtag Fair Trials attracted support from those concerned about defendants' rights. Celebrity endorsements poured in from unexpected quarters. Ellen DeGeneres, herself a prominent animal advocate, dedicated an entire show segment to Emma's story, featuring an interview with Robert Kim about Bailey's training. Bailey isn't just a dog, DeGeneres told her audience of millions. He's Emma's voice, her strength, her bridge back to the world. How can we ask a child to seek justice while taking away the one thing that makes her feel safe? The international attention was equally intense. The BBC's legal correspondent called Emma's case a fascinating window into American justice, while German television crews documented what they termed the evolution of disability rights in real time. As Judge Patricia Williams prepared to make her historic decision, legal scholars worldwide held their breath. Professor Morrison summed up the stakes in her final interview before the ruling. Emma's case will be studied in law schools for generations. It represents nothing less than a test of whether American justice can evolve to protect all citizens, regardless of disability. In a small apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, Emma Rodriguez practiced her testimony one more time with Bailey by her side, unaware that her courage was about to reshape the legal landscape of an entire nation. The courthouse was eerily silent at 7:30 a.m. on November 18th as Judge Patricia Williams made her way through the secured judicial entrance, a steaming cup of black coffee in one hand and a thick legal brief in the other. The media circus outside remained unaware that today would mark the most crucial moment in Emma Rodriguez's fight for justice, a secret demonstration that would either validate or destroy her hopes of testifying with Bailey by her side. Judge Williams had ordered this closed-door evaluation after 3 sleepless nights spent wrestling with the most complex legal decision of her 15-year judicial career. Her chambers looked like a war zone of legal precedents, with case files scattered across every surface and yellow sticky notes marking crucial passages in dozens of law books. She had consulted with colleagues from California to Maine, spoken with disability rights experts, and even called her mentor, retired Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, seeking guidance on this unprecedented situation. We need to see exactly what happens with and without the dog, Williams had declared during a private conference with both legal teams. I won't make a decision based on theory or emotion. I need empirical evidence of Bailey's impact on Emma's ability to testify. The courtroom felt cavernous and intimidating in the early morning light. Maintenance crews had worked overnight to install special recording equipment that would capture not just Emma's words, but her heart rate, breathing patterns, and stress. Responses through discrete monitoring devices. Dr. Amanda Foster, Emma's psychiatrist, had brought specialized medical equipment to document the physiological changes that occurred during testimony. Emma arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, holding her mother's hand with a grip so tight that Maria's fingers had turned white. The 9-year-old wore her favorite purple dress, the one she had picked out specifically for this moment, because Bailey had sniffed it approvingly during their morning routine. Her dark hair was pulled back in 2 neat braids, and her large brown eyes darted nervously around the imposing courtroom. Remember me, Amor, Maria whispered in Spanish, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. You just need to tell the truth. Mama will be right here watching. But Bailey was nowhere to be seen. Judge Williams had insisted on testing Emma's baseline testimony ability without any assistance, a decision that had prosecutor Lisa Chun pacing the hallway in barely controlled anxiety. Court reporter Margaret Flynn positioned herself at her stenotype machine, her fingers poised to capture every word of what would become one of the most important legal transcripts in American judicial history. Even Flynn, who had recorded testimony in over 10,000 cases, seemed to understand the gravity of this moment. Defense attorney Michael Brennan sat in the gallery, his usual combative demeanor replaced by something approaching curiosity. Despite his vigorous opposition to Bailey's presence, even Brennan found himself hoping that Emma could somehow find the strength to testify. His own daughter was Emma's age, and the thought of any child enduring such trauma struck uncomfortably close to home. Please state your name for the record. Judge Williams began gently, her voice deliberately soft and non-threatening. Emma Rodriguez, came the barely audible whisper. Emma's small frame was rigid in the oversized witness chair, her hands clenched into fists on her lap. Dr. Foster monitored her tablet screen, watching Emma's vital signs spike immediately. Heart rate, 140 beats per minute, well into the tachycardia range for a child her age. Breathing, rapid and shallow. Cortisol indicators showed extreme stress response activation. Can you tell me how old you are, Emma? Judge Williams continued, maintaining her gentle tone despite the growing concern etched on her face. 9, Emma managed, but the word came out as more of a gasp than speech. Her eyes darted frantically around the courtroom, and she began the familiar rocking motion that her therapists recognized as a precursor to dissociation. Prosecutor Chun attempted to ask Emma about that terrible night in September, but within minutes it became clear that the child was slipping away mentally. Her responses became increasingly incoherent. Her voice dropped to an inaudible whisper, and her eyes took on the glassy, distant look that trauma specialists knew indicated complete psychological withdrawal. Emma, can you hear me? Judge Williams asked, leaning forward with growing alarm. But Emma was no longer present in the courtroom. Her body remained in the witness chair, But her mind had fled to the safe place she had learned to retreat to when the world became too overwhelming. For 12 agonizing minutes, she sat motionless and mute, completely unreachable despite the gentle coaxing of everyone present. Dr. Foster showed Judge Williams the readings on her tablet. "Your Honor, Emma is experiencing a severe dissociative episode. Her stress hormones are at dangerous levels. We need to stop this immediately." "Bring in the dog," Judge Williams commanded, her voice carrying new urgency. The courtroom doors opened, and Bailey entered with the quiet dignity that had made him legendary among service dog trainers. Robert Kim held the leash loosely, but Bailey needed no guidance. His intelligent eyes immediately located Emma, and he moved toward the witness stand with purpose and precision. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The moment Bailey's warm weight settled against Emma's legs, her rigid posture began to soften. Her frantic breathing slowed, her heart rate dropped from 140 to 85 beats per minute, and most remarkably, her eyes cleared and focused. "Hi, Bailey," Emma whispered, her first coherent words in nearly 15 minutes. Her small hand found the familiar comfort of Bailey's silky ears, and suddenly, the terrifying courtroom felt manageable. Again, "Emma, can you tell me your favorite color?" Judge Williams asked, testing the child's renewed responsiveness. "Purple," Emma answered clearly, her voice gaining strength. "Like my dress." "Bailey likes purple too." For the next 2 hours, Judge Williams conducted the most thorough judicial evaluation of her career. She asked Emma dozens of questions, some simple, others relating directly to her testimony about Marcus Wheeler. With Bailey's steady presence beside her, Emma answered each question with increasing confidence and clarity. The difference was staggering. Dr. Foster's measurements showed normal vital signs throughout Emma's time with Bailey. Her speech remained clear, her memory sharp, and her ability to recount traumatic events remained intact without the dissociative episodes that had plagued her earlier testimony. Defense attorney Brennan watched in stunned silence as Emma described the events of that September night with heartbreaking detail and unwavering accuracy. Even he couldn't deny that Bailey's presence had transformed a traumatized, unreachable child into a competent witness capable of seeking justice. Judge Williams tested every aspect of Bailey's courtroom behavior. The dog never moved without Emma's subtle cue, made no sounds that could distract from testimony, and positioned himself so expertly that he would be invisible to jurors while remaining accessible to Emma. "This is extraordinary," Judge Williams murmured to her clerk as the session concluded. "I've never seen such a dramatic demonstration of accommodation necessity." As Emma and Bailey prepared to leave, the little girl looked up at the judge with eyes that held new hope. "Thank you for letting Bailey help me be brave," she said simply. Judge Williams retreated to her chambers, knowing she was about to render a decision that would echo through courtrooms across America for generations to come. Judge Patricia Williams emerged from her chambers at precisely 2:47 p.m. on November 20th, carrying a leather-bound folder that contained 15 pages of legal reasoning destined to reshape American jurisprudence. The packed courtroom fell into absolute silence as she took her position behind the bench, her usually stern expression betraying the weight of the decision she was about to announce. For 72 hours, Williams had secluded herself in her chambers, surviving on black coffee and determination, while crafting what she knew would be the most scrutinized ruling of her career. Her desk had become a battlefield of precedent cases, constitutional law textbooks, and medical journals documenting trauma responses in child witnesses. She had consulted with federal judges, disability rights experts, and even called her former professor at Yale Law School, seeking wisdom from every possible source. The gallery was standing room only. Maria and Carlos Rodriguez sat in the front row, their hands intertwined so tightly their knuckles had turned white. Emma sat between them, one small hand resting on Bailey's head as he lay calmly at her feet, his golden coat gleaming under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. The little girl's eyes were fixed on Judge Williams with an intensity that seemed far beyond her 9 years. Behind them, rows of reporters from around the world prepared to transmit this historic moment across the globe. Professor Janet Morrison had flown in from Harvard specifically for this announcement, knowing she was about to witness legal history. Disability rights advocates filled every available seat, their collective hopes resting on the words Judge Williams was about to speak. At the defense table, Michael Brennan sat with his client Marcus Wheeler, both men understanding that this decision would determine not just the fate of this case, but the course of Wheeler's life. Wheeler's arrogant demeanor had cracked during the secret demonstration 3 days earlier when he witnessed Emma's courage with Bailey by her side. For the first time since his arrest, doubt flickered in his eyes. This court has carefully considered the unprecedented request before us today, Judge Williams began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades interpreting the law. The question is not simply whether Emma Rodriguez may be accompanied by her service dog during testimony. The question is whether our justice system will evolve to ensure that all Americans, regardless of disability, have meaningful access to the courts. She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to settle over the hushed courtroom. In the press gallery, reporters leaned forward, their pens poised to capture every word of what they sensed was about to become a landmark ruling. After extensive research, consultation with medical experts, and direct observation of Emma's condition, both with and without Bailey present, this court finds that denying Emma her service dog would constitute a fundamental violation of her rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, and her basic right to access justice. A collective gasp rose from the gallery. Maria Rodriguez covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. Carlos reached over to squeeze his daughter's shoulder, whispering, "Mia, you won," in her ear. But Judge Williams wasn't finished. "However," she continued, raising her voice to restore order, "this accommodation cannot come at the expense of the defendant's constitutional right to a fair trial. Therefore, this court will establish specific protocols that must be followed to ensure both justice and fairness." The conditions Williams outlined were revolutionary in their precision and foresight. Bailey would be positioned behind a specially constructed barrier that rendered him completely invisible to jurors while remaining accessible to Emma. The dog would undergo additional training to ensure absolute silence during proceedings. Any sound, movement, or disruption would result in immediate removal. Most importantly, jury instructions would explicitly explain Bailey's medical necessity, emphasizing that his presence reflected Emma's disability rather than the merits of the case. This court has consulted with service dog experts, reviewed video footage of similar cases nationwide, and examined the physiological data documenting Emma's medical need for Bailey's presence. Williams explained, her voice growing stronger with each word. The evidence is overwhelming that Emma cannot provide competent testimony without her service dog. To deny this accommodation would not only violate her civil rights, but would effectively deny her access to justice entirely. The 15-page written decision was a masterpiece of legal reasoning that anticipated every possible appeal or constitutional challenge. Williams had cited cases dating back to 1954's Brown v. Board of Education, drawing parallels between racial segregation and disability discrimination. She referenced the landmark 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act, congressional testimony about courthouse accessibility, and even international human rights treaties protecting crime victims. Most remarkably, Williams addressed the emotional impact question head-on. The defense argues that Bailey's presence will generate inappropriate sympathy for the prosecution. This court finds such reasoning fundamentally flawed. We do not exclude wheelchair users from courtrooms because their disability might generate sympathy. We do not ban sign language interpreters because they might remind jurors of a witness's deafness. Service dogs are medical equipment, not emotional manipulation tools. The legal reasoning was so comprehensive that even Michael Brennan, despite his fierce opposition, found himself nodding in grudging admiration. Williams had crafted a decision so thorough and constitutionally sound that appeals would be virtually impossible. Furthermore, Williams continued, this court notes that 12 other states are currently considering similar cases. The decision, rendered today, will provide guidance to courts nationwide as they navigate these complex constitutional waters. Emma Rodriguez's courage in pursuing this accommodation will benefit countless other disabled witnesses across America. The international implications were equally significant. Representatives from the European Court of Human Rights had been following the case closely, as had legal scholars from Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom, all grappling with similar questions about courthouse accessibility for disabled witnesses. As Williams concluded her historic ruling, she looked directly at Emma, her stern judicial demeanor softening for just a moment. Young lady, this court commends your bravery in seeking justice while fighting for the rights of all disabled Americans. Bailey may accompany you during your testimony, and this court will ensure that both your voice and your rights are protected. The courtroom erupted in applause, a rare display of emotion in the usually solemn halls of justice. Emma buried her face in Bailey's soft fur, whispering, "We did it, boy. We really did it." Outside, CNN's Anderson Cooper was already broadcasting live in what legal experts are calling the most significant disability rights victory since the Americans with Disabilities Act. A Seattle judge has ruled that a 9-year-old trauma survivor may testify alongside her service dog in a groundbreaking decision that will reshape American courtrooms. But the real test still lay ahead. Emma's testimony was scheduled to begin in just 3 days, and the world would be watching as a little girl and her golden guardian made legal history together. November 23rd dawned gray and drizzly in Seattle, but inside courtroom 4C of the King County Superior Court, the atmosphere crackled with electric tension. By 8 a.m., every seat was filled with reporters, legal observers, and advocates who had traveled from across the nation to witness what CNN was calling the most important testimony in disability rights history. Emma Rodriguez woke at 5:30 that morning in the downtown hotel where her family had been staying to avoid the media circus surrounding their home. She had barely slept, her small body vibrating with nervous energy despite Bailey's comforting presence beside her on the bed. The golden retriever seemed to sense the magnitude of the day ahead, staying closer to Emma than usual and responding to her slightest movements with gentle nudges and reassuring looks. "Today is the day, mi amor," Maria whispered as she helped Emma into the navy blue dress they had chosen specifically for this moment. "Remember, just tell the truth. Bailey will be right there with you, and Mama and Papa will be watching every second." 3 floors below in the courthouse's secure conference room, Prosecutor Lisa Chun made final preparations for what she knew would be the most crucial examination of her career. She had rehearsed Emma's testimony dozens of times, but the courtroom environment would be entirely different from the safety of her office. The presence of Marcus Wheeler, the packed gallery, and the weight of national attention would test both Emma and Bailey like never before. At 9 a.m. sharp, Judge Patricia Williams called the court to order. The packed courtroom fell into absolute silence as she addressed the jury of 7 women and 5 men who would decide Wheeler's fate. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to hear testimony from a witness who requires the assistance of a psychiatric service dog due to documented medical necessity. The presence of this animal is not a reflection of the case's merits, but rather an accommodation required by federal disability law. The jury members, ranging in age from 28 to 67, listened intently as Williams explained Bailey's role with clinical precision. The judge's careful jury instructions had been crafted over sleepless nights to prevent any prejudicial impact while ensuring Emma's rights were protected. Defense attorney Michael Brennan sat rigid at his table, his famous courtroom confidence replaced by visible anxiety. Despite his fierce opposition to Bailey's presence, even Brennan found himself hoping that Emma would find the strength to testify. His own investigative team had confirmed the horrific details of Wheeler's crimes, leaving him with little choice but to challenge the evidence rather than deny the events entirely. At the defense table, Marcus Wheeler slouched in his chair, his previous arrogance replaced by barely controlled panic. The man who had terrorized a trusting child now faced the prospect of that same child confronting him in open court. His hands trembled as he avoided eye contact with the gallery, where Emma's extended family and supporters filled 3 entire rows. "The prosecution calls Emma Rodriguez to the stand," Chun announced, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. The double doors at the rear of the courtroom opened, and Emma entered with Bailey at her side. The little girl wore the navy dress her grandmother had sewn specifically for this day, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that made her look even younger than her 9 years. Bailey walked beside her with perfect heel position, his golden coat brushed to perfection, and his intelligent eyes scanning the room for any potential threats to his beloved partner. The specially constructed barrier Judge Williams had ordered was a masterpiece of judicial innovation. Standing 3 feet high and positioned strategically beside the witness stand, it completely concealed Bailey from the jury's view while allowing Emma to feel his reassuring presence. The barrier's design had been tested extensively to ensure no shadow, sound, or movement from Bailey could influence the proceedings. As Emma approached the witness stand, her steps faltered slightly. The courtroom seemed enormous from her perspective, filled with dozens of strange faces, all focused on her every movement. Her breathing quickened, and the familiar signs of anxiety began to manifest. Rapid heartbeat, sweaty palms, and the rising panic that had plagued her for months. But Bailey was there, his warm weight settling beside her feet as she climbed into the witness chair. Judge Williams had positioned a small step stool to help Emma reach the chair comfortably, another accommodation that demonstrated the court's commitment to making the process as trauma-free as possible. "Please state your name for the record." Chun began gently, her voice deliberately soft and encouraging. "Emma Maria Rodriguez," came the clear response. Emma's voice was steady, her eyes focused on Prosecutor Chun rather than darting nervously around the courtroom as they had during practice sessions. The initial questions were simple: Emma's age, where she lived, her school grade. Chun had choreographed this opening sequence to build Emma's confidence gradually, while demonstrating her competency as a witness. With each answer, Emma's voice grew stronger, her posture more relaxed. Then came the moment everyone had been dreading. "Emma, I need to ask you about the night of September 15th. Can you tell us who is babysitting you that evening?" Emma's gaze shifted briefly toward the defense table, where Wheeler sat hunched over, trying to make himself invisible. For a moment, her voice caught in her throat, and the familiar signs of trauma response began to emerge. Her hands started to tremble, her breathing became shallow, and her eyes took on the glassy look that therapists recognized as the precursor to dissociation. The packed courtroom held its collective breath as Emma seemed to slip away mentally. Reporters leaned forward, court officials tensed, and Maria Rodriguez gripped her husband's hand so tightly her wedding ring cut into his skin. Then, without any visible command or signal, Bailey rose from his position behind the barrier and moved closer to Emma's chair. The golden retriever's movement was so subtle that even the court officers monitoring him barely noticed the shift. But Emma felt his presence immediately, the warmth of his body against her legs, the familiar comfort of his breathing, the unshakable certainty that she was safe. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The courtroom watched in awed silence as Emma's trembling hand slowly reached toward Bailey, her fingers finding his soft ears in the gesture that had become her anchor to the present moment. The simple touch seemed to restore her connection to the world around her. When Emma's fingers made contact with Bailey's fur, something extraordinary happened. Her breathing stabilized, her voice cleared, and her eyes regained their focus. For the next 2 hours, she would deliver testimony so clear, so detailed, and so courageously honest that it would leave hardened court reporters wiping away tears. "Uncle Marcus was babysitting me," Emma said, her voice now strong and unwavering. "He was supposed to be my friend, but that night, he hurt me in ways that friends should never hurt each other." The moment of silence that followed would echo across America, captured by cameras and transmitted to millions of viewers who watched. A little girl find her voice with the help of her golden guardian. A jury deliberated for only 3 hours and 17 minutes, one of the shortest deliberations in Washington state history for a case of such magnitude. When the foreman, a 45-year-old Boeing engineer named David Chun, stood to read the verdict on November 24th, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Guilty on all counts. Marcus Wheeler received 25 years in prison without possibility of parole. But that single conviction was merely the beginning of a legal revolution that would echo through American courtrooms for generations. Within 6 months of Emma's historic testimony, 8 states had introduced legislation known collectively as Emma's Laws, comprehensive bills protecting the rights of disabled witnesses to have their service animals present during court proceedings. The first to pass was California's Assembly Bill 2847, signed by Governor Gavin Newsom in a ceremony where Emma and Bailey were honored guests. Emma, Rodriguez, and Bailey have shown us that justice must be accessible to all Americans, regardless of disability, Newsom declared, as cameras flashed around the golden retriever wearing a special ceremonial bandana. By December 2025, 23 states had enacted similar legislation, with federal lawmakers in Washington, D.C., drafting the Americans with Disabilities in Justice Act, a comprehensive bill that would standardize courthouse accommodations nationwide. Senator Elizabeth Warren, who had followed Emma's case from the beginning, invited Emma to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee, making her the youngest person ever to address the Committee on Disability Rights. "When I was scared in that big courtroom, Bailey helped me be brave enough to tell the truth," Emma told the assembled senators, her voice carrying clearly through the ornate hearing room. "Other kids like me shouldn't have to be scared to ask for help from their service dogs." Bailey sat perfectly still beside her chair, his presence lending Emma the same quiet confidence that had captivated the nation during her original testimony. The legal precedent Judge Patricia Williams had established became the gold standard for courts nationwide. Her 15-page decision, formally titled Rodriguez v. State of Washington, was cited in over 200 subsequent cases across 35 states. Law schools from Harvard to Stanford added Emma's case to their curriculum, with Professor Janet Morrison's Georgetown University course, Disability Rights in the Digital Age, becoming one of the most sought-after classes in American legal education. But the transformation extended far beyond legislation and legal precedent. The National Court Reporters Association documented that over 300 child witnesses with PTSD had successfully testified alongside their service animals by 2026, representing a 400% increase in successful prosecutions of crimes against disabled children. The Prosecutors National Association credited Emma's case with fundamentally changing how the justice system approached traumatized witnesses. Emma herself, now 12 years old and in 7th grade at Roosevelt Middle School, had become an unlikely celebrity in the disability rights community. She and Bailey traveled to conferences across the country, sharing their story with judges, attorneys, and advocates working to make courtrooms more accessible. Their appearances drew standing ovations and inspired dozens of other families to pursue similar accommodations for their children. "I never thought being scared would help so many people," Emma reflected during a 2026 interview with Katie Couric on Today. "But Bailey taught me that being different isn't bad. It's just different. And sometimes different people need different kinds of help." Bailey, now 5 years old and sporting a few gray whiskers around his muzzle, demonstrated his skills for the national television audience, showing how he could detect Emma's stress levels and provide comfort through deep pressure therapy. The documentary Bailey's Voice: How a Girl and Her Dog Changed Justice premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January 2026, winning the Grand Jury Prize for Documentary Filmmaking. Director Sarah Chun, no relation to prosecutor Lisa Chun, spent 2 years following Emma's journey from traumatized victim to national advocate. The film's most powerful moment came when cameras captured Emma visiting a courthouse in Denver, where another young witness was preparing to testify with her own service dog. "You're going to do great," Emma told 8-year-old Sofia Martinez, whose case had directly benefited from the legal precedent Emma established. "Your dog loves you, and that love makes you brave enough to tell your truth." The scene, viewed by over 50 million people worldwide, crystallized Emma's transformation from victim to champion for others facing similar struggles. The ripple effects extended internationally as well. The European Court of Human Rights cited Emma's case in establishing new guidelines for courthouse accommodations across the European Union. Countries from Canada to Australia began implementing similar protections, with Emma's story becoming a touchstone for disability rights advocates worldwide. Robert Kim, Bailey's original trainer at Canine Companions for Independence, found himself overwhelmed with requests for courthouse facility dogs. The program that had produced Bailey expanded from training 50 dogs annually to over 200, with specialized courthouse programs established in 15 states. Emma and Bailey prove that service dogs aren't just medical equipment, Kim explained during a 2026 TED Talk that garnered over 10 million views. They're bridges between trauma and healing, between silence and voice, between fear and justice. The Rodriguez family's quiet suburban life had been forever changed by their unexpected journey into legal history. Maria returned to nursing but now specialized in pediatric trauma care, using her experience with Emma to help other families navigate similar challenges. Carlos had become a sought-after advocate for fathers of abuse survivors, speaking at conferences about supporting children through the legal process. Emma's relationship with Bailey deepened as she matured, their bond evolving from medical necessity to profound friendship. The golden retriever, now trained to detect Emma's rare anxiety episodes before they occurred, had become her constant companion in a life filled with speaking engagements, media appearances, and the normal challenges of adolescence. Sometimes, "I wonder what would have happened if Judge Williams had said no," Emma mused during her 13th birthday interview with 60 Minutes in 2027. "But then I remember that Bailey and I were meant to help other kids find their voices. That's why we went through all of this, not just for us, but for everyone who comes after us." As Emma spoke, Bailey rested his graying muzzle on her lap, his eyes still bright with intelligence and devotion. Their story had begun with a moment of trauma that shattered a little girl's world, but it had grown into something far greater, a testament to resilience, love, and the power of one voice to change the world. The courtroom that had fallen silent when a little girl raised her hand toward her dog had become the epicenter of a revolution in American justice, proving that sometimes the smallest heroes create the most profound changes. Emma Rodriguez and Bailey had not just sought justice for themselves. They had opened the doors of justice for countless others, ensuring that no child would ever again have to face their trauma alone.